I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. They might just be the swingiest of the swing states in the 2024 presidential election, Pennsylvania and North Carolina. And joining me now with a look at those local politics are two very special guests, Rich Zeoli and Jonathan Feltz. Rich Zeoli has been here before. He's a former GOP strategist, and now he is the host of the Rich Zeoli Show on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT in Philadelphia. And Jonathan Feltz is a good friend of mine. He's a former White House political director during the Bush-Cheney years, and he is now a Raleigh-based Republican strategist with the Indy Group. So welcome to Perino on Politics. This is the podcast where I call all of my smart friends, and they tell me what's on their minds about the state of American politics. And believe it or not, well, I guess we'll have to start with North Carolina because Pennsylvania is the state that I think Kamala Harris has to win, right? We'll find out more about what Rich Zeoli thinks about that. But North Carolina is a battleground state, but for this entire year, it's been like, but of course Trump's going to win it, obviously. Then there's a switcheroo with Biden and Harris, and now all of a sudden Harris is there all the time. So if you pay attention to politics and you think if you're a candidate that has limited time, I got back in touch with Jonathan and said, do you know, is there something going on down there in North Carolina that Kamala Harris sees that maybe we don't see? And that's how we started our conversation. And then there was the big political news over the weekend in North Carolina with the Republican gubernatorial candidate. So we've got some time here. Let's start off big picture, Jonathan, about North Carolina. And is it a battleground? Can Kamala Harris win it?
So North Carolina is a battleground state, but I feel confident Donald Trump is well positioned to win it for the third straight time. When we initially had our conversations when President Biden was still at the top of the ticket, I told you that I thought their focus on North Carolina was as much about Georgia going off the map for Democrats, Arizona going off the map for Democrats on the presidential side. Now with Kamala Harris taking over at the top of the ticket there without having gone through a primary or anything like that, the enthusiasm gap has not been entirely closed, but has been diminished quite a bit. And so they're really focused on independent, unaffiliated voters, transplants here into North Carolina, folks who've moved into the suburbs of Raleigh and Charlotte and places like that. And that could have somewhat of an impact on some of these down ballot races, the state legislative races. We've got supermajorities in both houses, House and the Senate here in North Carolina, which plays a big role in our public policy process.
Meaning Republican supermajorities?
Yes, I'm sorry, Republican supermajorities. And the governor only recently in the past 20 years got the veto power here in North Carolina, I guess past 25 years. And so it's never really been a big deal. This is
and he's a Democrat.
Right. Yeah. The Cooper administration is the first time we've had an opposing party in the legislative branch and the opposing party in the executive branch. And so he's used a veto more than any other governor in North Carolina history. But once we achieved supermajority status, that went away. And so some of those down ballot races that could have somewhat of an impact. But in all reality, if you go back to 2014, the Senate race with Tom Tillis, 2016, with both the presidential race and the Richard Burr Senate race, 2020 with Tillis's reelect, and then 2022 with Ted Budd, the groups that have funded the majority of the independent expenditures from Democrats have all been the pro-abortion groups, the pro-choice groups. And so my commentary is I think it's hard to target these women more than they've already been targeted from a voting perspective and voter GOTV effort, things like that. And so we can talk about that some more later on in the show, but that's what I think is attracting the Harris campaign.
Could I ask you one other thing? Because Hemmer asked me to ask a question of you about demographic changes since COVID and how many people have moved to North Carolina. And has that been something that you're seeing could have a significant impact in the 2024 election that we wouldn't have seen in 2020?
It can, and I was going to save this for the third segment, but I'll go ahead and jump into it. What Democrats are really focused on is they want to talk about the younger transplants, the people that are college educated, in their 30s, they just moved to Raleigh, just moved to Charlotte, talking about those demographics. What they're not talking about is the retiree community in North Carolina. And so in 2022, with Ted Budd's race, when the early votes came back, which they would count the early votes on Election Day and then release those as soon as the polls closed on Election Day. So we found ourselves about 250,000 votes down after early votes were counted. And what I told reporters was just wait till these retiree communities come back. And it's not people buying $1 million beach house in Wilmington or buying $1 million mansion in Asheville, but it's people moving to places like Currituck County, Camden County. You want to go out west, Rutherford or Wilkes County in the foothills of North Carolina. It's people that are moving to North Carolina. Yeah, they like the weather. Yeah, they like the mountains. Yeah, they like the beach. But what they really love is their dollar goes a lot farther in North Carolina. And so when they go vote, they're voting for red state policies, not voting for blue state policies, because they will maintain that financial security. And that's the reason Republicans will win on election day in 24, in my opinion.
All right, let's move to Pennsylvania then, because Rich, this is for all the marbles. I'm sure you are inundated and everybody's asking you, what do you think on what's going to happen? And let me just add my question. Can you give us an update on where you think things are in Pennsylvania at the presidential level?
Sure. First of all, happy birthday, Percy.
Oh, yes, 3 years old. My dog, 3 years old, Percy.
It's big. Let's not bury the lead there. Watching the Eagles game yesterday, Dana, was infuriating because every other commercial is a Kamala Harris commercial. She's even running commercials on my radio station, which is a conservative talk station, as you know, a Fox affiliate. And she's just bombing the airwaves. And that's their strategy, obviously, which is to just do an air campaign of just saturating with commercials and avoid interviews. So how do things look in Pennsylvania? Well, clearly the issue still is fracking. John Fetterman was on Meet the Press yesterday. He was asked a question about it. He says fracking is not going to be a big issue in this race. Dave McCormick put out an ad recently. I know you saw it. You talked to him about it, where he shows all these jobs disappearing if fracking goes away. The latest surveys, and it depends on which poll you look at, they're showing the race is still very, very close. But here's the key. Each poll seems to say voters trust Trump more on the economy, and they still have a lot more questions for Kamala Harris. So there's a lot of uncertainty around Kamala Harris, and she didn't close the deal at the debate. So the big issue, obviously, in southwestern PA is going to be fracking. That's going to be primarily what the issue is. Trump's coming to Pennsylvania today, so it's Monday. He's coming to do a whole big thing on farms, and he wants to stop China from buying farmland. That's going to be a big part of it that's going on. And then you have in southeastern PA, right outside of Philadelphia, you've got obviously the message that's driving the airwaves and everywhere else is Kamala Harris is going to be great for first-time home buyers. Kamala Harris is going to be great for people just trying to start a business. Kamala Harris is going to give you everything you need. And what the surveys are showing is voters kind of like the sound of that, but they need more specifics on that. And so that's where things stand right now. It's clear that the Republican registration efforts are paying off big time. Two important metrics are that Republican registrations are up versus 2020, and Democrat requests for mail-in ballots are down from 2020. Now, that could just be because people decided that they can vote in person because it's not a pandemic anymore, or it could be a lack of enthusiasm among Democrats. But we're waiting for the new numbers to come out from the Secretary of State, Dana. But as of right now, the number of requests from 2020 is significantly down right now by a couple 100,000. So.
And for people who might have been skeptical about the election rule changes in Pennsylvania in 2020, what should they know about this year in 2024? Have those been addressed?
Well, there's still a whole bunch of litigation that's going on. Montgomery County, PA was just sued by the RNC on Friday over testing of ballots. It's kind of a complicated issue, but it's this whole idea of curing ballots and testing them prior to Election Day. There's still the question of the ballots that are not dated. And the High Court came out finally and said those ballots will not be counted. Now there's more litigation on. So if somebody sends in a mail-in ballot and it's not dated and that ballot's rejected, can they vote in person with a provisional ballot? That's going to be litigated right now. I know the RNC is working very, very hard to get ballot watchers, to get polling place watchers, and they've been doing this whole thing called Protect the Vote, and they've had the RNC chairman. I was actually at an event with them a couple of weeks ago in China State, Montgomery County, as a matter of fact, where they were recruiting people to be poll watchers. So they're taking election integrity very seriously in this cycle. They really are. But there's going to be a lot of lawsuits, and we're all being told, don't expect to know the results of Pennsylvania on election night. So if this is the state that's going to decide the presidential election, we're all going to be very, very tired and cranky on Wednesday, I think.
So are election rules an issue for you in North Carolina, Jonathan? And if you could also comment on just the recent back and forth with RFK Jr., who fought to get on the ballot in North Carolina and then fought to get off the ballot in North Carolina after he endorsed Trump. And North Carolina, unlike Wisconsin and Michigan, said, OK, fine, you can come off the ballot.
Right. Yeah. The Board of Elections has become a bit of a banana republic here in North Carolina. It's two Republicans, two Democrats, and then one independent. The independent is someone who changed his party registration from Democrat to independent, I think, the day before he was appointed, and so it's a bit of a farce there. But so that case did go to the North Carolina Supreme Court. They ruled that the Board of Elections had to go back and reprint the ballots. Basically, what happened was the board said, go ahead and start printing ballots when RFK dropped out and did not give him a chance to withdraw from North Carolina before they printed. And so that's what happened there. I think all in all, it's a good thing for Republicans. I think the impact is somewhat minimal because no one really had, RFK had not gotten a ton of traction here in North Carolina, but it was the right thing to do. And so I think that will be helpful to Republicans. In terms of election laws, the GOP chairman, as your other guest referred to, Michael Whatley, he was, of course, formerly the North Carolina GOP chairman. And so they've had a strong election integrity program dating back to 2016. 2020, I think we set a record for Election Day watchers. And so we'll have a powerful war room on that front and be ready for that on Election Day.
Let me ask you about, Rich Zeoli, about the ground game in Pennsylvania, because I was reading this week that Kamala Harris has a very good and official ground game that has actual paid campaign staffers. And there was an article, I believe it was Associated Press, and this is more in Michigan, but I had read about it in Pennsylvania as well, that the organization for the Trump campaign is at a different level, and that there's some concern by some Republicans saying it's not good enough.
Well, I know that there are groups that are stepping up outside this, like PA Chase and some others that are trying to overcome that gap. It really just depends on where you are. I mean, I think you're seeing a lot of the ground game, get out the vote effort that's happening already now. Is there was a delay in the ballots being printed and being able to go out because there was some litigation that had to be dealt with around that with Cornel West and with RFK Jr. as well. So I think you're to see that stepping up now. I really do. But this whole game is becoming both parties, and I know the Republican Party is doing this big time, get your mail-in ballot in early so we don't have to target you. They're telling us they're going to have an entire program dedicated, and they do, to knowing who has already requested a mail-in ballot. And then if they haven't, they're going to go target those people. Now, that's a seismic shift from 2020, Dana, when it was all left to chance. But that's what they're saying. And so they're going out there and telling people, please get your requests in for a mail-in ballot. They're actually encouraging people to vote by mail. The Republican Party is. And they're saying, if we don't know that you made the request, we're going to come to you and make that request. So I'm told that effort is underway. It's going to start. It's going to be big. It's going to be a very comprehensive program. But this is
But there's only 42 days left.
Yes, correct. And we are now in the midst of the beginning of early voting. And what I'm telling you, in terms of commercials, it's not even close. There are so many more Harris commercials running on TV and radio. It concerns me, to be honest with you. It really does. As somebody who wants to see Trump win, I'm concerned by it. But she's just saturating the airwaves. Mm-hmm. And I know that she's raised more money and she's planning another big media buy in these closing weeks. I mean, it's hard to believe we're in the closing weeks of this election. Mm-hmm. Voters don't really know much about her. Now, the question, of course, is going to be suburban female voters, right outside of Philadelphia and the collar counties, and how much the impact of that versus the guys and gals who work in the fracking industry in Western PA. But in all the focus groups we've seen and all the polling we've seen, it doesn't seem as if abortion matters as an issue anywhere close compared to the economy. And I think part of that is the fact that Josh Shapiro is the governor, and he's a very strong supporter of abortion rights. So they don't really view it as a threat in Pennsylvania. So I think the economy is going to move the needle on suburban women and their shopping and what they're paying versus the issue of abortion. And that's another issue, obviously, that Kamala Harris is spending a lot of time, and the PACs are as well, just saturating the airwaves about Trump's national abortion ban, which, of course, is not true, but that's what they're saying. That's
interesting. What about down in North Carolina on that issue, Jonathan?
Yeah, it's the economy is by far and away the biggest issue, followed closely by immigration, or not that close, but close enough on immigration. The abortion issue, that is not something really impacting undecided voters. Those voters who really care about that issue, they've made their decision who they were voting for probably 18 months ago. I remember in 2022, Sherry Beasley, the Democrat nominee for Senate, she allegedly went to all 100 counties, but she was wearing a choker necklace that said "Save Roe" on it. And the reality is most folks think it's pretty weird to wear jewelry, exercising your position on abortion. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing in North Carolina is Kamala Harris, she's here a lot, but she's in the big cities. She's in Greensboro, she's in Raleigh, she's in Durham, she's in Charlotte. She's not going to rural North Carolina. Donald Trump is campaigning all over the state of North Carolina because in these rural communities, they've been impacted by the Harris policies much more significantly than some of the urban areas. You know, if you're in rural North Carolina, you're driving a pickup truck, not because it's going to be the cool truck at the Boy Scout Jamboree with your kids or, you know, hauling golf clubs to the country club. It's because you need that truck for work. You know, if you have a 45-minute commute in rural North Carolina, you're driving 40 miles. If you have a 45-minute commute in New York or DC, you're driving maybe 3 miles. You know, it's one of these things where like gas prices have a real impact. Grocery prices, real sticker shock, real impact. I mean, my wife and I, we're blessed, we're fortunate, we do pretty well. But, you know, last Christmas, she looked at me and said, you don't want to know how much these groceries costed for Christmas dinner. And if we're having that conversation, working families across North Carolina are having that conversation. And that's who Kamala Harris is trying to avoid. The one time she tried to talk about, you know, issues other than just abortion, became a Trump campaign ad, I think, before she was wheels up leaving North Carolina. She basically tried to blame family farmers being in collusion with the grocery store magnates or something to price gouge at the grocery store. And it was laughable. And the reality is, you know, people in North Carolina, in rural North Carolina, are going to go to the polls on Election Day with one simple question. Am I better off now than I was 4 years ago? And they're resoundingly saying no. And so we see that with Lori Buckout in the 1st Congressional District. The Democratic chair down here said, we want Kamala Harris to campaign over there. Well, guess what? I would love Kamala Harris to campaign over there. I would love her to have Don Davis standing right beside of her and answering to the people, you know, why she has done what she's done to impact their and decimate their family budgets in that district.
One last question in this segment to both of you, and that is something, Jonathan, that you and I talked about, something I care a lot about, which is messaging to rural voters. You've touched on it there. I remember you saying something like the Democrats just do not have a way to reach rural voters in North Carolina. And is that one of the reasons you believe that Trump will win North Carolina?
It really is. I mean, on all the issues that voters care the most about, crime, border security, the economy, they trust Donald Trump a lot more than they trust Kamala Harris. And the thing is, in these rural communities, they really are impacted every single day by these bad policies. Again, like I said, I can't stress enough, gas prices, that really impacts you when you got a 40-minute or a 40-mile drive every day back and forth to work. And you got that 40-mile drive because there's not a job right there next door to you in your community because Democrat policies have failed in a lot of ways when it comes to economic development. The opportunity curve seems to stop with Democrats in the urban areas here in North Carolina.
Rich, what about you and rural voters there?
Well, I read this article recently. There's this guy, he said he voted for Trump in 2016. He voted for Biden in 2020. He works in fracking. And he said he will never vote for Democrat ever again because of the war on energy as he views it. And that's what he said. He said, you know, with all these EV mandates and the ban on fossil fuels, and he goes, this is my livelihood. I just don't trust it. Rural voters, I don't think they trust Kamala Harris that she won't ban fracking or put a moratorium on it or at least won't invest in it. I mean, it needs investment. It needs to grow. It's an industry that could grow, whereas Trump is saying we'll grow. And don't forget something, Dana, as we speak right now, there is a ban on liquid natural gas exports. And the Biden administration still has not lifted that ban. It's so stupid. I mean, that's just like a gimme, you know?
Yeah, of all the flip-flops, why hasn't she flip-flopped on that?
Yeah, like I mean, exactly, right? Go against the administration on that and say they should immediately do this now and invest in liquid natural gas export facilities in Pennsylvania. That would be huge. And they know Trump will do that, and they know she will not. So at best, they think fracking maybe stays where it is, and that's only because of the governor. But they know it's not going to be a growth industry, and that concerns them. And the second issue is agriculture, Pennsylvania's other major industry. And that's where Trump is appealing to right now by saying, we're going to stop China from buying your farmlands. So those are issues where I think he dominates on both of those issues. All
right. We will have more Perino on politics in just a moment. And we are back with Perino on politics. All right, Jonathan, now you're in the hot seat about what is going on in North Carolina. Can you give us a synopsis about the gubernatorial candidate, the fire he is under, and Trump really pulling away from him, distancing himself from him?
So as most everyone listening to this podcast has probably heard, CNN had a story last week with a lot of damaging allegations in that story. This is a constantly breaking story, so who knows where it will be, 24 hours from now. But the latest is Mark Robinson has said he is going to sue CNN. He has said he's going to fight back against these allegations. He categorically denies everything. And so he said he's going to fight back against it. The big question everyone has now is, does this impact the presidential campaign? And the reality is, I think reverse coattails is a fiction created by Biden and the Clinton staffers in 16 and 20 to explain why North Carolina was lost. In 20, you had the Cal Cunningham story. Cal Cunningham, the Democrat running for Senate, turned out he had an affair. Mm-hmm. You had Deborah Ross, who's now a congresswoman, but she was the former chair of the ACLU in 2016, who had a lot of fringe left positions. The Democrats felt like she brought down the ticket. The reality is, though, that's not an issue. Donald Trump is just fine. He's already, he's already seen as a separate candidate. He still has that grassroots appeal to working families, so he'll be in good shape. With down ballot, certainly there will be some attacks trying to link Robinson to down ballot candidates. But the reality was they already had plenty of content before these new allegations. And so the Democrat playbook is not changing dramatically. Some reporters are being, some of the local reporters are being suckered into thinking it's dramatically changed the game plan for Democrats. But the reality is they were going to be attacking about Robinson anyway.
Okay. And Rich, in Pennsylvania, you don't really have a scandal like that to talk about. But you do have this really important Senate race of Dave McCormick, and he's running against Bob Casey, the incumbent. He's been running a little bit behind, but I saw a poll last week that had him more tied. How do you see that race right now?
Well, the two questions that are going to determine that race, I think. Well, obviously, the Trump effect. I mean, I think McCormick is tied to Trump. I really do. I don't see people voting for Trump and then voting for Casey. I just don't see that. So I think if Trump wins, McCormick wins. I really do believe that. But there's the issue of crime. I mean, just over the weekend in Philadelphia, we had these car drag shows where people were attacking cops and beating up police cars, smashing police cars. It was insane. It was chaos. The effect of crime and immigration remains a variable that we have to figure out here, because Casey has been dodging it and McCormick's running hard on it, hard against the illegal immigration issue and hard against crime. So that's really strong for him. And then the second factor is the anti-Semitic issue, too. McCormick's got an op-ed in the New York Post calling out Casey for standing with the people that are anti-Israel. And as that conflict goes on, that effect's going to go. And I think there's a hidden subtext in Pennsylvania that nobody's talking about, which is everybody realizes that Josh Shapiro would have been a way better pick than Tim Walz as vice president, but he probably wasn't picked because he's Jewish. And so I think there's that factor, too, that's at play. And the Republican Jewish coalition and a number of Jewish groups are seizing that and taking advantage of all these different events to go out there and say, you got to support Trump. You cannot stand with Harris or with Casey because they are not going to stand with Israel. So a lot of that is we have to see what happens with that conflict as well.
I had a guest on America's Newsroom last week. Oh, gosh, can't think of his name off the top of my head. He was a Pennsylvania voter, Jewish man, had always voted for Democrats, came on the show to say, this is why I am voting for Trump. And he was encouraging all Jewish Americans because he said, he said, I am a single issue voter and my issue is Israel. You do wonder if that's going to make a difference in that election. All right. We will be right back with more Perino on Politics. And we are back with Perino on Politics. Jonathan, this is where I ask, what am I missing and what are you paying attention to that I could be missing? And I kind of revealed yours a little bit early because we were talking about demographics and that you're paying a lot of attention to that. Anything else on your mind that was maybe second on your list?
Sure. No, another thing that's popular right now is people focus on unaffiliated voters in North Carolina and how that registration has been increasing. Those folks are not, they might be registering as unaffiliated, but the reality is they're still voting the same way they've always voted. And so you're really looking at roughly a 6 to 10% who are genuinely undecided voters. But one thing we'll talk about it when it comes to registration is GOP registration is up, Democrat registration is down. And to put that in perspective, in 2016, when Trump won North Carolina, Democrats had a registration advantage of 640,000. This year, that's down to 130,000. And so the enthusiasm is on the side of the Republicans. The demographics are changing some in terms of the transplants, but the demographics are also changing in a lot of these traditionally Democratic counties are all voting more conservative now, whether they're changing the registration or not. And so I feel good about Donald Trump's chances when it comes to Election Day in 2024.
Okay. And Rich, at this point in the race, 42 days to go, what do you pay attention to?
I'm paying attention to the size of the crowds at rallies because it really does matter, and the support in rural PA. And I'm paying attention to the request for mail-in ballots because that definitely matters, and we'll see if that Democrat enthusiasm factor is down. One important point is that Gallup recently showed Donald Trump's favorability is at the highest it's ever been. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of people who probably in 2020 said, all right, I don't like his tweets and I don't like COVID and I'm going to vote for the nice old man in the basement. Then the economy hit them. They still may not like Trump this go around, but Kamala Harris is not sealing the deal, closing the deal with them when it comes to the economy. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of these voters in PA are going to hold their nose and vote for Trump. And I think he ultimately is going to win.
A week from tomorrow. So we're taping this on a Monday, and a week from Tuesday, you'll have the first vice presidential debate. My last question to you both, Jonathan, you can go first. The vice presidential choices this year, how much would they matter compared to other years?
I don't think it matters nearly as much as what we pretend like it does. I mean, they get a big splash. I mean, Walz has kind of came out of nowhere. So he's had his name ID shoot up. J.D. Vance has really gotten comfortable being the attack dog. But the reality is when people go vote on Election Day, they're voting for the top of the ticket. And so it'll be a 2-day story after the debate, unless there's just a significant gaffe. But 2-day story after the debate. But then people go vote based on the pocketbooks. And that's why Trump wins.
We'll see if any flies show up, too. Rich Zeoli?
Yes.
I think that I took a giant sigh of relief and actually said this on America's Newsroom. I thank God they didn't pick Josh Shapiro to be the running mate, because we'd be having an entirely different conversation about Pennsylvania right now.
Which makes me think that she made a mistake.
A huge mistake, Dana.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is ultimately, if she loses this campaign, I think it's going to come down to that. I really 100% do.
I'll give you one observation I had last week. So last week when Oprah had her lifestyle event with Kamala Harris, I'm not calling it an interview, a lifestyle event. Perfectly fine to have that. Or town hall, they could have called it. There were all these celebrities that got on the screen. They weren't there. They got on camera and they expressed their support, and they had a few lines that they were trying to say. And I always find them so awkward because they want to be in politics, but they're really not good at it. So they don't quite know what they're doing. The lines aren't written for them. So it's weird. But I got the sense that they were feeling like they knew they had to say they supported her. They knew they had to sound enthusiastic-ish, but their heart's not in it. And they know she's likely to lose. I could be wrong. Look, their strategy could work. She could win. But this race right now is very, very close. We're trying not to pay too much attention to the polls because they're just right within the margin of error. Yeah. And yes, she's up a little bit in the national polls, but I just got the sense from those celebrities that they knew that it might not end well for the Democrats. That's my sense.
I have a friend she's a single mom, and she's a professor, and she just really does not like Trump. She thinks that Harris is a terrible candidate. She's going to vote for her, but she's not excited. She's not thrilled. And when she picked Walz, she was really disappointed. And she's now getting this doom and gloom among her group of friends. She reports back to me and she says there is really a feeling here that she blew the debate. She didn't win that debate, and the Oprah interview was just bad. She said it reminded her of one of her students who was reciting a book report that she didn't read the book. And
I said that any high school extemporaneous speaker that competes on the high school speech and debate team could have answered any of those questions better than she did.
100%.
All right. Well, let's give you the last word, Jonathan, since it's your first time being on Perino on Politics.
Well, I think what you're getting at is voters are looking for authenticity, and that's what they like about Donald Trump. They feel like what he says in public is what he says in private. There's nothing authentic about Kamala Harris. Yeah. She campaigned for Attorney General as the top cop, and then she campaigned for president as defund the police. She was for fracking. She was against fracking. Fracking was going to kill her grandnieces. What does she actually stand for? And I think the reality is no one knows.
Well, can I stay in touch with both of you in the next 42 days?
Sounds good. Thanks, Dana.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.